Voilà, je pense qu'on va aborder la dernière partie de notre journée. Donc, après avoir
Please take your seats. We're about to resume our proceedings. We start the last part of our symposium. We've talked a lot about Samuel Courtault's personality. Now, during the last part of our talk, let's look at the history of the Courtauld Institute. We're going to hear from Ernst Vegelin. The head of the current head of the Courtauld Gallery is going to share with us a history of the Courtauld Institute from its inception in 1932, the entire history throughout the war, the collaboration with the Warburg Institute in particular, and the international influence of Anthony Blunt's leadership from 1949 to 1972. Alixe Bovey was meant to talk to us about research techniques and teaching methods used at the Institute. Unfortunately, she was unable to do that due to strike actions. But Deborah Swallow, who is the director of the Courtauld Institute of Art, will be our second speaker, and she will discuss plans to modernize Courtauld, a project called Courtauld Connects, an amazing plan to refurbish facilities and also digitize the body of documents.
Thank you, Angeline. I want to start by saying from my heart what an extraordinary pleasure it has been to bring the collection to France and to Paris, to work with Courtauld Collection and Suzanne Paget and Angeline and all of the colleagues here has been for us a great adventure, and we are just so thrilled that so many people in Paris and beyond are enjoying the pictures and enjoying and bringing to life Samuel Courtauld's vision. And I want to thank you also for spending the day with us and taking an interest in what we are all doing. So thank you. I am going to talk for about 20 minutes about Samuel Courtauld's other project, which is part, in a sense, of his philanthropy, part of his social vision, not the collecting of art per se, but the founding in 1932 of the Courtauld Institute of Art. Let's see. So the Courtauld Institute of Art, its foundation, can be credited chiefly to three individuals. Samuel Courtauld on the left, perhaps you're now a little bit familiar with. The man in the middle, Sir Robert Witt, was a lawyer, a voracious collector of drawings, and perhaps now best known for having established the Witt Photographic Research Library, which is a library of over 1 million images of paintings, which is part of the Courtauld Institute of Art. When he died, he bequeathed to the Courtauld Gallery about 3,000 drawings, along with about 20,000 prints. The man on the right is Arthur Lee, Lord Lee of Fareham, Viscount Lee. He was a soldier and a politician. He, in 1921, gave to the nation his country house, which was called Chequers. And Chequers might ring a bell because it is where the Prime Minister has her country retreat, and it is featured in the dreaded Brexit negotiations. After he retired and after he gave Chequers, he was very much involved in the art world. Like Lee and like Courtauld, he was a trustee of the National Gallery, and like them, he was also a serious collector. He gave his collection of old master paintings to the Courtauld Gallery when he died, and that collection includes wonderful things, Cranach, Rubens, Goya paintings, and so forth. Lee and Courtauld and Witt were very distinct personalities with separate social circles and separate approaches. Witt was very interested in research, in the architecture and infrastructure of the research of art history. Samuel Courtauld was really not terribly interested in that at all. And Lee was, for example, very specific in his taste. He hated anything that had a modern tendency in art, and that included Samuel Courtauld's Impressionist pictures, which he loathed. Nevertheless, the two men, Lee and Courtauld, became good friends, particularly in the last decades of their life. So despite these differences in personality and taste, they all recognized that there was a structural problem in the art world in Britain. Britain had some of the great private collections, some of the greatest public collections. Art, museums, galleries were starting to play a much more important role in public life in Britain. And yet the country had no facility for the professional training of those people who would care for and interpret this resource, this great treasure house, for the public benefit. So no facility for training curators, museum directors, critics, scholars, teachers, the art historians of the future. The crucial point to make here is that art history in Britain was not an established subject taught at universities. It had no separate status, no methodology as a serious humanities subject. Art history was still largely the concern of amateurs, of connoisseurs, who practiced a mode of sort of connoisseurship with a particular set of questions, often around attributions. And it was considered a fairly dubious proposition as a serious intellectual endeavor. This was quite different from the position, for example, in the German-speaking world, which of course was the mother, in a sense, of art history, where art history faculties had been established in universities actually before the First World War already. And so when Lee and Courtauld and Witt started to think about a way of remedying the situation in England, they looked significantly at Austria and Germany. They looked at Vienna, they looked at Berlin, they looked at Hamburg, and a new art history institution that had been developed in the town of Marburg. At the same time, a very remarkable experiment was taking shape in America, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, at Harvard University. And I'm referring to the Fogg Art Museum, which some of you may know. The Fogg Art Museum had been a very traditional university art museum. There was a collection of plaster casts. There was a very third-rate collection of European and American paintings given by Mrs. Fogg, and that was it. And it was simply an adornment to the university. This all changed in 1927 when, under the leadership of Edward Forbes as director and Paul Sachs as deputy director, the new museum opens, which you see there, in 1927, with a very particular and visionary pedagogical purpose. And the concept was that the teaching of the history of art should happen with reference to original works of art, to scientific research, to great libraries, for discussions, seminar rooms. Everything should be located under one roof, and there should be an open interdisciplinary sort of mix of activities. And that is what they built at Harvard. So seminar rooms, libraries, stores, a technical research laboratory, beautiful presentation of the collection. And this institution and this approach laid the foundation for the teaching of the history of art in America for decades. And it was incredibly influential. Samuel Courtauld and his wife Elizabeth visit the Fogg in 1927. They meet Paul Sachs, they have lunch with him, exchange ideas, and Robert Witt has already been to talk to the Fogg. Witt had very strong connections in America. One of his proteges was Helen Frick, who established the Frick Art Reference Library in New York, and both men were entirely persuaded by what the Fogg was doing. In 1928, Lord Lee draws up a document that is called the Draft Scheme for the Provision of the History of Art Facilities in England, and he presents this to the University of London. It's very important to them that this institution is established as part of a formal higher education environment, not just an independent enterprise. The University of London accepts this proposition. Samuel Courtauld decides to give £100,000 of his own money to get the project underway. That is a large amount of money. His most expensive picture, The Bar at the Folies Bergères, bought in 1926 for £22,500. So he could have bought 4 of those for the price of his philanthropy of the Courtauld Institute of Art. The idea is supported very much in the press, including by Roger Fry, and various other donors come forward, some slightly more reluctantly than others. There's a nice story that Joseph Devine promises to Lord Lee that he will give maybe £20,000, and then suddenly changes his mind and says, I'm not so sure that I can do that. And then Lord Lee writes a letter to the Times newspaper saying how grateful we are to Devine for his gift of £20,000. And then, of course, he can't withdraw it. It's not a perfect fundraising strategy, but it worked in this case. So the University of London draws up plans to build a facility for the Courtauld Institute of Art in, appropriately, the Bloomsbury district of London. But Lee and Courtauld don't want to delay, they want to get on with it, they're excited, and Courtauld decides to give his house to the Institute, and this is a temporary measure. It's meant to be a temporary measure, and they appoint a director, and that is W.G. Constable, who is a deputy director of the National Gallery. It's meant to be temporary. As with all temporary things, it turns into a long-term solution, and in fact, all of the teaching of the Institute remains there until 1989. The Courtauld opens its doors in 1932 to its first students, and so what happens is that these magnificent rooms that you see here in Samuel Courtauld's time, installed with all of his glorious sort of collection and that wonderful combination of domesticity and grandeur, they become the libraries and the seminar rooms and the teaching facilities of the Courtauld Institute of Art. Slightly incongruous, but rather wonderful. This is one example. This, I think, is rather hilarious. On the right, the typing pool, the cataloguers for the slide library, with Cézanne's Plaster Cupid and the Van Gogh landscape and the Degas pastel on the wall behind, and the lecture theatre in the former dining room with, I think that's Manet's Déjeuner sur l'herbe on the wall. So a very remarkable atmosphere. And then in the stable block, which was Courtauld's garage, effectively, at the back of the house, a technical research department is established very early on in 1934. That is considered essential for the understanding and proper teaching of paintings, materials, techniques, supports, and so on. And then just to pause here briefly and reflect again on what Samuel Courtauld was actually trying to do. Was it just about teaching art history and the status of art history as a subject? And I think the answer to that is no, the ambition was far greater. This is you can read it, I hope, an excerpt from a letter at the top that he wrote in 1936 to Lee. And they're reflecting on why they established the institution. And he says, "We spoke of putting art on the map through official university recognition and making it recognized as a paramount partner in our civilization, instead of a poor and slightly discreditable relation. It seemed to me that the Institute would be a kind of missionary center from which the idea of the value of art would spread through many diverse channels." So ultimately, the project was not just about better teaching of the history of art, but actually what that would lead to. Teaching the teachers was the concept, teaching the people who'd go out into the world and throw open the doors of art to the widest possible population, as he says in the last excerpt, spread an appreciation of art throughout the nation as widely as possible. So that was what he was trying to do. The Institute and his building and donation of his collections were two prongs of the same project, to democratize art for the benefit of society. That was really what he wanted to achieve. The Courtauld launched with a BA, MA, and PhD and diploma course, and with rigorous exams and lectures. Can you read that? Question 4. What was the main contribution of France to the development of European art during the 14th century? I'll give you 5 minutes to write your answers, and we'll collect the papers at the end of the lecture. This is sort of quite evocative of the way that art history was examined, I think, at the time. There was also a program of lectures which the students attended, and they were open to the public as well. Initially, there were very few permanent staff at the Courtauld. Most of the teaching was done by the director and deputy director, and the rest of the lecturers came from various London museums, as well as visiting lecturers, young scholars like Kenneth Clark, who is on that list, who would become the director of the National Gallery, and then Anthony Blunt, who would become the director of the Courtauld, and I'll come back to him in a moment. Interestingly, this is not just a Western art history. There's Buddhist sculpture on there, there's aspects of Chinese art, and so on. The intellectual environment at the Courtauld was transformed by the terrible events that were happening, unfolding on the continent and in Germany in particular. In January 1933, Hitler's National Socialist Party comes to power. In April of that year, they issued the law for the restoration of the professional civil service, which bans any people from non-Aryan descent of government employment, including in museums and universities. 6 weeks after that happens, the British government establishes something called the Academic Assistance Council, which was designed to bring scholars from the German-speaking world to England. And you think now of how long it takes a government to do anything. 6 weeks immediately, and it happened, in the blink of an eye, and German scholars started to come in significant numbers. So the year after this is 32, 33, there are already 15 German and Austrian émigré scholars giving lectures at the Courtauld. And this is just an example of some of them. They are all very resonant names who enriched the history of art to varying degrees, but each in their own way. On the right is Johannes Wilde, the Austrian-Hungarian Michelangelo expert who became the deputy director of the Courtauld at one point, and Ernst Gombrich is third from the right. At the heart of this émigré community was an institution that is in some respects the sister institution of the Courtauld, and that is the Kulturwissenschaftliche Bibliothek Warburg, a really extraordinary thing. that was established in Hamburg by Abby Warburg. And you see here on the left a photograph of the 5 Warburg brothers, a great banking family. On the right of that photograph is Abby. If you look carefully, you can see he's sitting with his arms, his hands cupped, begging in supplication, because his very successful brothers funded his cultural project at the library in Hamburg. He opted out of the family business, so this is meant to be slightly humorous. On the right is Fritz Saxel, who was the director. It was Lee and Courtauld who were instrumental in rescuing the Warburg Institute in 1933. And so 60,000 books alongside all of the research that the Warburg was doing arrived in London in 1933 on 2 steamships from Hamburg. A really powerful moment. And then in 1936, when the library is again in trouble, Samuel Courtauld again steps forward and commits £5,500 annually for 7 years. And the institutions become closer during the Second World War. There is a bombing in London, the Blitz. The Institute leaves London for a period and goes to Guildford, and the teaching is done principally by Warburg scholars, because the Courtauld staff are mostly involved in aspects of the war effort. The paintings are evacuated. They go first with the National Gallery's collection to Lord Lee's house in Avening in Gloucestershire, and when the bombing spreads and they're at risk there, they move again with the National Gallery pictures to the slate quarries in Wales, where they spend the rest of the war. I want to mention one more thing for the Warburg, and then I'll slowly conclude. This very remarkable meeting of academic cultures, the Germanic and Austrian and the English and the émigré and the homegrown, could have become much closer when in the 1950s the University of London designed a scheme to combine the 2 institutes and make them neighbours. So at the top, that was never built, but that was the proposal for the 2 institutions adjacent to each other in Bloomsbury. The only bit that got built was the right-hand bit, which you see on the photograph below, and that is where the Warburg went and still is. And at the top of the Warburg was where the Courtauld Gallery was until 1989. And you see there a room of Impressionist pictures with the Manet Bar at the Folies Bergère on the right. The period after the war belongs entirely to Anthony Blunt, who was made director in 1947. That, importantly, was the same year that both Lee and Samuel Courtauld die. And so there is a historical break and a new leap forward. 10 years earlier, when he was in Cambridge, Blunt had been, well, famously now recruited by Soviet intelligence to become a spy. And he was then invited by the Warburg to come to London to teach at the Warburg and to lecture at the Courtauld. He was unmasked as a spy in 1979. In fact, he had already been identified as a communist agent, although not active anymore, in the 60s, but it had been kept a secret. It was in 1979 that Margaret Thatcher actually took the decision to unmask him. He had retired by then as director. That, I think, is a subject of its own, but his contribution to the Courtauld was really extraordinary. He created an absolutely exhilarating atmosphere in the 1950s. He worked tirelessly for the cause of art history in England. He built an institutional culture which absolutely prioritized research at the highest level of quality, very gifted new students arrived with first degrees in history and philosophy and languages and literature, and so art history never became a narrow subject. It always looked out and was interdisciplinary and generous. And it was in those decades, the 50s and the 60s, that this small institution became an absolute intellectual powerhouse. There was a huge sense of purpose, a sense of mission, and a feeling that art history had only scratched the surface of what was possible. And many of the students who were with us then went on to lead university departments and lead museums around the world. It became a center of real international renown. There had been, in 1938, there had been 45 students. In 1974, there were about 220, and this indicates also just the appetite for art in England. New universities were established. Courtauld graduates went to those universities to teach. Museums were flourishing, and the public interest was at a high point. And the Courtauld really was a significant agent in that, and that absolutely was what Samuel Courtauld had in mind, this precise intervention in the art world with a very deliberate sort of democratizing purpose. So I'm going to stop there and hand over for the last contribution to Deborah Swallow, who is the Courtauld Institute of Art's director. Thank you.
Please excuse me as I just set up my my rather strange system, which I will use. First of all, may I add to Ernst's hugely warm delight at our collaboration with the Fondation. This exhibition, working with you at the Fondation, has been completely unique in our history, and I will say a little more about that at the end. But it is an absolutely tremendous occasion, and we're extremely grateful to everyone involved for making it possible. And I want to thank Suzanne Paget also for convening this event today, and our own trustee, Daniel Luxembourg, for being another energy behind it and inviting us all to participate. And to say how much I have enjoyed today in hearing the many rich contributions. So I want to pick up from where Ernst Vegelin has left off in his story, and I put in my notes Anthony Blunt, Golden Age, ? It was indeed a golden age, but I would like to think that we're moving into an even brighter golden age as we move forward from today. He was an amazing intellectual powerhouse. He drove himself and those in the Courtauld to create this world of art historians, particularly throughout the UK, but also beyond that. He continued to recruit brilliant students and had that single-minded passion. But there was one thing that he did not attend to. He was an academic and intellectual. He wasn't hugely interested in real estate. And the whole question of the future of the Courtauld and where it would be physically was left still unresolved when he retired, leaving it to his successors, his also eminent successors, to try and find a way forward. That way, the obvious way, the expected way, being thwarted, as Ernst had said. And indeed, it was getting urgent because the lease on Hume House, intended as a temporary residence, was about to fall in. The Courtauld had expanded, as you've heard. It had actually occupied 2 adjacent houses as well, and it was bursting at the seams. And I think if you can imagine those premises, probably without any decoration whatsoever, any changes, that many years later, were probably, by that stage, extremely shabby. The solution... Sorry, this is this one, isn't it? The solution was inspired.
Quelle était donc la solution? La voilà, un vrai éclair de génie.
Grâce
à cette solution, le Courtauld, avec ses galeries, ses salles de formation, ses centres de recherche, le Courtauld a pu se réunir tous ces éléments-là au sein d'un seul bâtiment. Il s'agit là d'un bâtiment qui a été construit pour le George III par l'architecte William Chambers pendant les années 1770. C'était à l'époque
a grand, highly decorated building at the north end of the complex. These buildings, with their clear economic and political interests, the Navy and all the revenue departments, were to be softened by the presence of institutions which reflected Britain's enlightened society and implicitly to justify its colonial ambitions and sense of cultural superiority. So here were housed the Royal Society for the Sciences, the Antiquaries for Historical Understanding, and the still young Royal Academy of Arts, which demonstrated Britain's vibrant contemporary art practice as it emerged in the late 18th century. The Royal Academy's Great Room was the largest space yet created for the public display of art and spectacle in the late 18th century. And as you can see, the spectacle was not just artistic. It was also the society of the day, whether standing and gazing at each other as well as the paintings, or looking rather more indiscreetly at a missed step or two down the rather wonderful stairs in the building as they exited the annual summer exhibition. By the time the Courtauld moved into Somerset House, as Ernst has said, it had grown considerably. Its teaching numbers had grown, its faculty had grown. The one thing it had slimmed down was the level of casual education, if I can call it that, but also the range which it covered. Blunt was a specialist. Blunt decided that the Courtauld should have firm focus in the European tradition, and the larger swathes of the wider world were handed over to the School of Oriental and African Studies in the mid to late 1950s. So it was deep focus. But it had established and continued to run the conservation department, and to that it added conservation of wall paintings. And by the time it came to the Somerset House, that was beginning to flourish. And the directors early in Somerset House also wanted to encourage independent student activity, including, for example, an annual or biennial student exhibition of contemporary art to be shown in the parts of the building that were used for teaching and research and student activity. These works were all found, curated by the students, brought from independent artists and dealers, and shown for periods up to 18 months in the gallery, giving them extra curatorial experience. In this period, the Courtauld also has developed and expanded, not necessarily its collection of works on paper, but it has revealed, very much under Ernst's leadership, its collection of works on paper. He's mentioned Witt as a great collector. Some of our subsequent donors, the great Antoine Zeilen, were great collectors of works on paper. And this really superb collection of between 7,000 and 8,000 works lay understood but not widely shown in the Courtauld, and over the last period of time, this has been changed radically, largely thanks to a series of very generous benefactions, and we can thank one of the wonderful members of our audience and indeed our panelists for a key role that he has played in making that transformation. Equally, the activity that has been evolved in the Courtauld since the move into Somerset House has been the development of a much more integrated exhibition programme, which has flourished again under Ernst's leadership, in which typically small elements of the collection, or important but discrete elements of the collection, have been brought together with works from other collections worldwide to make really serious research interventions, and which have consistently achieved very, very warm reviews. But I want to pause at this point, and in fact I'm taking over the contribution that my colleague Alixe Bovey was to have presented had she been able to be here, and at this point I would just again personally like to present her apologies for the circumstances which prevented her. The Courtauld was set up, as Ernst said, as an academic entity, but with a broad public remit as well. When we moved to Somerset House, we were still an institute of the Central University of London. In 2002, it was decided that the Central University could not afford us as we currently stood, and it challenged the institution to become an independent entity or to cut its coat according to its cloth and become a smaller institute, or to go in with one of the bigger colleges of the university. Both the colleagues in the Courtauld and our leaders reviewed the options and with great courage and confidence opted for independence, and an endowment was raised over a very short period of time to make this possible. What, though, this entailed, perhaps we're only over time discovering, is that the Courtauld has assumed the responsibilities of a full university in the UK, despite being the very smallest such entity in the whole country. It's an interesting challenge, given the increasingly complex accountability required of universities in the UK. Over the past 17 years, the institution has continued to grow in numbers and in its range of activity, but scholarship and research remains at the heart of all we do, whether within the gallery or the university. And I've mentioned some of the programmatic developments that have taken place. But I would like to pause here to talk a bit about our teaching and research and give you a sense of what we actually do. The Courtauld has roughly 35 faculty, 6 curators, and 550 students. It remains an extraordinarily creative, committed, and dedicated community. Indeed, it's a passionate community. I think we have inherited by osmosis the passion that Samuel Courtauld brought to his collecting and interpreted in many different ways. And I'm going to say a few words about some of the things that make the teaching and research at the Courtauld special. We have 4 departments that contribute to our research and teaching: history of art, conservation of painting, easel paintings, conservation of wall paintings, and we have, of course, the gallery as well, which is also a huge support with both research and teaching. The art history department has 25 permanent faculty, ranging in expertise from late antiquity to the present, and focusing on an increasingly broad geography, including Europe, the Americas, and Asia. We're currently working hard on establishing new posts focusing on the art of Africa and its diasporas. The Courtauld Gallery curators contribute to teaching in a variety of ways, through our MA curating the Art Museum, through a very active programme training emerging scholars to work with prints and drawings, through close collaboration with conservation students, by working with art historians to ensure that their students benefit from the collections to the greatest extent possible. And we have the 2 conservation departments, which I've mentioned before. It's best, I think, therefore, to show these departments not as isolated units, but as in the diagram here, as closely related groups with shared commitments to teaching informed by advanced research. We offer 7 qualifications now, ranging from the BA to the PhD. Our MA in the History Art is highly distinctive. It is a one-year program with about 180 students each year enrolled on special options led by members of our faculty. These are taught in small groups, usually 8 students, who work closely with their teacher throughout the year and by the end have developed the ability to work as independent researchers. We have about 90 PhD students at any given time, a phenomenal group of people who work together and collaborate with others in ways that are an inspiration to us regularly. While they write their dissertations, they also organize conferences, lead and participate in training, teach, and edit a journal of postgraduate research we call Mediations. Across the very diverse range of programs that we offer our students, there are a few things that mark out our teaching. And I think this resonates with things that have been said about Samuel Courtauld himself and that Anna picked up in her talk this morning. All teachers are taught in small groups and have lots of personal engagement with their teachers, that I've mentioned. Students are encouraged to become researchers right from the start. Active learning, close looking, source-based research are all part of all of our degrees from the start. And if there is anything that you can call a Courtauld method, it is that the work of art is at the center of all our research and teaching. As an example of this point, I'm showing a few snaps from a recent event at the Victoria and Albert Museum. Here, Elizabeth Morrison, curator of manuscripts at the Getty Museum, was with us to deliver an annual lecture. One of our PhD students, Michaela Zogj, is a curator of medieval art at the V&A. And she, Elizabeth, and Professor Joanna Cannon had a seminar where a dozen objects relating to Dr. Morrison's imminent exhibition, The Book of Beasts, were examined. All generations, if you like, at the Courtauld coming together in one site. So the PhD students and faculty were able to examine these objects together and discuss and ask questions about the objects of the experts, their materiality, their history, their iconography, their evidence of use and change, and how they would be exhibited at the Getty. That's just an example to show one of the ways in which we focus on works of art as physical objects, and also how we work with allies, partners, and alumni to provide extraordinary opportunities for our students. The Courtauld, as I'm going on to say, this year has started a period of remarkable change. We were very concerned about the impact this change, which I'll describe shortly, would have on our students. We welcomed them in October to a party in the gallery, but it was a gallery with empty walls. The works of art had already gone in store or were being prepared to come here to Paris, to all of our delight, of course. And we were worried it would look terrible and the students would be dismayed. In fact, they were fascinated. The experience in the gallery gave us a wonderful opportunity to explain what we were doing and actually to enjoy the 18th century architecture in a slightly different way. But then, at the beginning of this term, we celebrated the opening of a new temporary premises for the Institute in a building near King's Cross. It's called Vernon Square, and luckily we still have warm, smiling faces amongst students and staff who are enjoying it, and an amazing facilities team which managed to move the whole university and 2.5 miles of books over the Christmas vacation. I mean, I think that's quite a challenge in England, certainly. I'm not sure what it'd be like in France, but to do that with the Christmas holidays when most people just pack up for 2 weeks was no mean feat. And Vernon Square will be our base for the next few years, while we transform our own site. One of our key developments in the period since we became independent has been the development of a research forum, currently named the Secular Research Forum, which has many different functions. As you will see, it is both an umbrella for many of our research events. It's also an incubator for research and it's a vehicle through which we exchange and share our research with the wider community. The unit stages something like 150 events each year, mostly free and open to the wider public. And we welcome thousands of people into this program each year, which serves as a platform for cutting-edge research and debate. This Art History Undisciplined is one of our conference programs in the last year, which range from highly focused one-day events to larger and smaller programs, in this case one which explored the larger opportunities and challenges faced by our field. What is art history? A discipline or an undiscipline? And it was a great, very enthusiastic and inspiring discussion. Sharing advanced research with advanced researchers is one important part of what we do. But our transformational project, which we are going to call, or we are calling Courtauld Connects, in our research activity is intending to enable us to be ambitious in ways that will transform our research engagement as well. And these slides are with a door gradually opening and light emerging from it are little symbols of the way in which we hope that the work we're about to do and we are doing will transform our relationship with those around us and about us and bring them in through our doors. And one of the events that we have created over the last few years is what started as annual is now biannual. I think is that what happens when you have two in a year? Event called ResFest, which I can probably loosely describe it as a sort of TED Talks. But the TED Talks take place throughout the building. These are short talks and presentations and displays and performances by our own students, our staff, our alumni, our collaborators, our partners, our neighbours, which are hugely popular and sell out almost immediately, and which started in London, and we are now moving to Belfast, as we did last October, to Dundee, probably to Kristiansand in Norway, and maybe, perhaps, we could bring one and do it with you in Paris in the future. And the next ResFest, and this is an advert to you, is taking place on April the 26th. So any of you who might be in London on April the 26th, please do come and join us at ResFest Courtauld 19. So coming back to Courtauld Connects and our future, we moved into Somerset House 30 years ago. And 30 years ago is a long time to live in a building. Think of your own homes. Furthermore, when we moved into Somerset House, we were taking with us a model of behaviour that was appropriate to a series of vertical houses, which we had previously inhabited. Ironically, this palatial building is a series of vertical houses. Imagine a Georgian terrace or a Georgian crescent, which has simply been moved into a sort of this shape. And that is the Courtauld. It has, I now have been told, 48 changes of level. It has many staircases, but virtually no coherent lateral circulation. It's a wonderful building in a wonderful place, which has great deep history, and a great architectural, as well, archaeology, if you like. And it's now, as a larger entity, becoming a great centre for the creative industries. So it's a great place to be. But the building itself, we are working against. We are doing our best, but we have found it difficult. And we made the decision, therefore, that we had to do a major transformation. And that transformation has become symbolic of the ongoing transformation of the Courtauld as an organisation. So the building, we're going to do physical improvements. We're going to make it accessible. We're going to open the doors. We're going to make it welcoming. We're going to provide public facilities. We're going to improve and expand our galleries. We're going to restore. That diagram sort of shows the, I think you'll see sort of some key circulation routes that we're creating, including some quite important but very selective structural interventions in the 18th century building. We're going to restore, very importantly, the Great Room, the Royal Academy's great public space at the top of the building, into a new wonderful space. That's not a literal rendering, but it's just to give you an idea of the sort of space and the light that the room will get. We're going to improve our teaching facilities and all our services. But the program is also very much about making connections between our several activities within the Courtauld, making those linkages yet stronger than they have been before, and linking between what we do locally in London at Somerset House and what we do nationally and internationally. So Courtauld Connects, the tagline that we have for the project, is about connecting the past, the present, and the future. Above all, this project is actually about people and the study, understanding, and enjoyment of art. It's about the future for our students, our staff, and our visitors. It's absolutely about excellence, but it's also about inclusivity. And here, the different themes come together. You've seen the photographs of Samuel Courtauld. His family's wealth came from the textile and synthetics and thereby chemicals and paints industry. As a part of the project, we've created a network of links with museums and galleries in cities and towns across the UK where Courtaulds Limited had their textile, chemical and paint factories. None of this industry survived the collapse of manufacturing in the late 20th century Britain. And these towns and cities, Coventry, Preston, Hull, Wolverhampton and Belfast in Northern Ireland, are struggling to create new economies. Cultural activity is a key part of the new world they're seeking to develop, and we're working in partnership with them. That is the larger network of partnerships we're developing, of which those 5 I've mentioned are the key elements. We're lending works and co-creating exhibitions and educational programs and developing long-term multi-stranded collaborations, which we hope will also play a part in expanding our range of students at the Courtauld. Here you see an example of one of the provincial museums in Preston on the lower left, which we are collaborating with. And on the top right, a reminder that one of our collaborators was the City of Culture in the UK in 2017, and Coventry, our other partner, will be City of Culture in 2021. All of this is part of a concerted attempt to be supportive and to gain by joining forces. And linking with those is a whole series of programmatic activities. But our work is also international. We have long attracted international staff and students to the Courtauld, and you've just heard about the role that German scholars played critically in our formative years, along with our partnership with the Warburg. And we have long lent works from the collection to major institutions internationally, but we intend to do more. This exhibition at the Fondation is the largest we have ever mounted, and it has been an absolutely wonderful revelation to us. And we will learn hugely from this experience in thinking towards the future. We are also continuing to extend our international reach with new faculty, with specialisms in Africa, the African diaspora, and we hope before long, South Asia. The Courtauld has always prided itself on the value of face-to-face interaction, and that will always remain at our heart. But new technologies, too, offer us exciting new possibilities, which will help extend both our national and international reach. We are starting to publish online. Courtauld's Books Online is one example, and broadcast our research events. This is nothing unusual. To many organizations are doing that. But for us, we're young to the game. And we're in process of creating a digital surrogate for our huge photographic resources that you heard about earlier, in order to share these otherwise rather inaccessible assets with a wide community. Those assets come to a total of over 3 million items. The width is in fact double the size that Ernst mentioned. It's 2.2 million items. So it is certainly at least the third largest in the world of such photothèque. The Conway is about 1.1 million, which is photographs of architecture, sculpture, and embraces a number of collections of original photography, which are extremely valuable. We are raising the money to do this, and we have received some bequests and gifts towards this. But one of the exciting aspects of the work on the Conway Library is that we are working with volunteers, another way of reaching out to the wider community. We currently have some 400 volunteers from all parts of society and all backgrounds who are working with us, doing this work, doing this digital photography, developing photography skills, digital analysis skills, art historical skills, and cataloguing skills. Many of them had never heard of the Courtauld before they saw an advertisement on a volunteer's website. And we were overwhelmed and continue to be overwhelmed by the response. These are people who are not the elite of the art world, but they are as enthusiastic as anybody could be. And our intention with all of this is to create a platform that will ensure that these assets are both eminently useful for scholarly research 24/7 and enjoyable for amateurs and a wide public of all ages. Now, some of you in the audience, particularly, that is the Witt Library. In fact, that has been done by a different process. There it's being packaged and moved to a digital photography facility in Amsterdam. And that is the way we will do those works. But the Conway is being done by volunteers. Ernst mentioned some of our distinguished former students. I have not done any such thing as yet. But in talking about the genuine public value of all the Courtauld has done, does, and wishes to do in the future, I must absolutely turn to our alumni. Our former students are one of our most important assets, as both today's event may indicate. Both Ernst and Karen and Barnaby and Ketty, as it so happens, and Sasha, 5 of the curators that the Fondation team will now be very familiar with, were all educated at the Courtauld. But we have alumni worldwide. And I want to, some you will recognize, Nick Sirota, director of Tate, now director of the UK's Arts Council, Neil McGregor, director of the British Museum, Nick Penny, former director of the National Gallery, Anita Bruckner, an author, Mark Jones, director of the V&A, the National Galleries at the National Museum of Scotland, and we can go on. The Gabriele Finaldi, National Gallery director. We have, in the middle, Francis Morris, director of Tate Modern. We have Zara Sturgis, director of the Ashmolean, Nick Cullinan, director of the National Portrait Gallery. We are the mafia, certainly, of the UK's art world. But I want to mention one particular person in the lower right-hand side. Our most recent, really exciting, as well, alumni appointment and achievement is the wonderful Kaywin Feldman, who, having been the director of the Minneapolis Museum of Art, has become the first woman director of the National Gallery of Art in Washington. I think that really says a lot about the way also that the world of art institutions is going. And of course, new generations follow them, forging careers within universities at the earlier stages of careers, in public museums and galleries, in the art trade, in the media, in the whole of our cultural infrastructure. They work in the UK, across Europe, across the American continent, throughout Asia and the Middle East. They're bringing art to refugee camps in Syria and Iraq, and they're conserving artworks and sites worldwide. Our alumni, as Samuel Courtauld, I think, believed firmly, are our past, our present, and our future. As Ernst has said, he spoke of the Courtauld as having a missionary role. The word missionary now in 2019 carries rather too much of a religious and an imperial resonance, perhaps, but we can understand absolutely what he meant and absolutely can translate it into the language of the 21st century. And we all share, I think, the belief that we need to continue to fight for a humane society and to ensure that the study of art and its histories retains a central place in our communities. And this is the cause that the Courtauld will absolutely continue to champion, as I know does the Fondation. So I want to just conclude by thanking Monsieur Arnaud, Monsieur Claerbergen, Madame Paget, and all your colleagues at the Fondation for all you've done to make this exhibition possible, and for all the support that this is giving to the Courtauld in many manifest ways, for embracing Samuel Courtauld, and for the celebration of Samuel and Elizabeth's role. And I want to raise her name because I know she appears within the exhibition as collectors, patrons, and institutional founders. We were able to describe, really to their amazement, I believe, the impact of the exhibition here in Paris at the meeting of our trustees yesterday. And they particularly asked for their gratitude, pleasure, and excitement to be conveyed to you. We're all thrilled that this exhibition, as Ernst also mentioned, taking place at this particularly difficult time politically, is a profound declaration of our two countries' shared cultural heritage and affection. Thank you.
Avant de se quitter, nous escomptions une journée qui serait passionnante. Elle a dépassé, je crois, nos attentes. Et je tiens à remercier encore une fois tous les intervenants qui nous ont fait bénéficier de leur expertise.
We expected today to be very interesting. Our expectations have been exceeded. It's actually been an exciting and fascinating symposium. Many thanks to all of our speakers for sharing with us their experience, their field experience.
J'aimerais associer à ces remerciements
I would also like to extend my thanks to the many staff who've worked tirelessly to make sure today's seminar would be a success. It's taking a lot of organizational work. Sophie Durleman, Deputy Director at the Foundation. I would also like to thank Élodie Berthelot, Élise Blanc, Joachim Monéguet du Sorbier, Aurélien Gage, not forgetting Sébastien Bisset, and Patricia Bifa, involved in communication. Sistine de Saint-Léger, in particular, has provided important assistance in organizing today's symposium. Many thanks for attending, many thanks for helping us to organize this amazing seminar, and what better day than today, the first day of spring. Thank you.